whenever you request any component, first the constructor will be called. After calling the constructor, it will start with an event ng on changes. ng on changes. ng on change is an event. ng on change is an event. So this is the first event that actually fires up. This is the first event that fires up. So in this event, generally what happens is when an input or output activity are performed, the changes happened in the values. Those changes will be updated and identified. So first constructor will be loaded. After constructor loaded, then comes the first method ng on changes. So this event will fire up. Actually, these are all methods. So this will fire up. This will fire up when an input or output binding value, input or output binding value changes. That means the first method that is called is the binding method, that is ng on changes. Whatever the values you defined for your elements, in the TS file you defined some properties and you are binded to the properties in HTML. The binding of properties, values to the properties will happen. So on ng on changes, it will first bind the properties. After binding the properties, then the next event, actually, after binding the properties, the next event that comes is ng on init. Init is initializing. That means this event actually comes after the first change. That means ng on changes. So first changes event will fire up. After the changes event, initialization. That means any value to be initialized and kept in the component that comes from HTML or some other location. If you want to load and initialize that, when component initializes, I want some actions to perform. Those actions are defined on ng on init. ng on init. This will usually occur after the binding is finished. First, binding of values on ng changes. After binding the values, initialization of values. After initialization of values, then comes another event, that is ng do check. ng do check. This ng do check will fire up after initialization. And this event is used by Angular to manually identify the changes. That means developers' custom change detection is managed by DoCheck. That means if any change occurred, they are identified automatically by Angular by using ng on changes. Some changes are not able, Angular is unable to identify the changes implicitly. Those changes we need to explicitly find out. Developer has to write custom changes to identify the changes happened inside the component, because sometimes they may be using custom events, custom functions. Angular cannot identify those custom functions and identify the changes immediately. We have to manually explicitly write the functions for them. So some changes are not detected through ng on changes. Then we have to do that by using ng do check. Ng do check, this is actually used for developers custom change detection. That means if Angular is unable to identify the changes, then we have to explicitly identify the changes. That we can do by using ng do check. So the first one is on changes, second one on init, another do check, and finally ng on destroy. ng on destroy. On destroy, so this is after rendering the response. That means it is just before the directive is destroyed. Directive is destroyed. That means you are using the directives for storing the data like ng model and all, ng for ng if. They store the data and keep the data to use in the component. After they finished using the data in the component, they will destroy the component. They destroy the memory allocated for the component. So these are the major events in the component cycle. Internally, some other events will happen. Internally, some other events are managed. Actually, the first event when application starts, when a component starts, is ng on changes. So what happens in this event? It binds the values to the properties. Okay. After that, initialization of component. After that, identifying the changes explicitly and updating the changes. Then destroying the memory allocated for the component after render completed. These are the actions usually performed. These are the actions usually performed. This is at the high level. This is at the high level. These are the actions performed. Now, internally, some more events will fire up. Internally, some more events will fire up. So these are the component life cycle. Internally, some more events will fire up. So what are the events that fire up? Actually, we have the events like after the do check happened. After the do check happened. So some more events